Welcome. My name is Tracy O'Malley, and I am the Executive Director of the Plus Group. We want to thank you for taking your time to join us today for the Plus Group webinar series. Today, we're also kicking off Disability Insurance Awareness Month, which begins in May. And the Plus Group will be holding its second annual National DI Day event at various locations throughout the country on May 5th in most locations. So we encourage you to reach out to your local Plus Group office if you're interested in attending, or you can contact me, Tracy O'Malley, at my email address is Tracy, T-R-A-C-E-Y, at plusgroup.us.com, and I'll give you that information again at the end. Today's webinar is, the topic is Income Protection Through Every Stage of Life, and our presenter is Sean Hansen. He is the Director of Operations at the Council for Disability Awareness. All lines will be muted during this webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, please go to the question pane on your control panel and type it in, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the webinar. Also note that we are recording this webinar. It'll be sent to you along with the presentation. You'll get the actual link that has the presentation as well as the audio in a follow-up email, and that you should receive in about 24 hours. So you should receive that tomorrow. Okay, everyone, I am now going to turn this over to Sean.
Thanks, Tracy, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today, and thanks so much to the Plus Group for inviting me to speak to you. As Tracy said, my name is Sean Hansen, and I'm the Director of Operations for the Council for Disability Awareness, or the CDA. We are a nonprofit educational organization, and very simply, our job is to educate working people about the importance of protecting their income through disability insurance. Later in the webinar, I'll be explaining more about our organization. But for now, I'm going to dive right in. I do apologize if I sound a little scratchy. I think I am fighting a cold, but I'll do my best to speak nice and clearly. So we're just a few days away from the beginning of Disability Insurance Awareness Month, and together with the Plus Group, we thought it would be the perfect time to schedule this webinar. My goal for today is to give you our perspective on the state of income protection in America and talk about what the CDA is doing on behalf of the industry to educate consumers about this important topic. I'll discuss why education is so important, and I'd explain how the CDA attempts to communicate the story to working consumers. Then I'll walk you through the extensive suite of resources that we're making available this May to support the Disability Insurance Awareness Month campaign. And as Tracy said, we'll also have some time at the end for you to answer any of your questions. So let's start by looking at the environment we're dealing with and why income protection awareness is so important. The bottom line is that risk is higher than people think, and the consequences are worse than people like to imagine. And while many Americans don't look beyond their employee benefits package when it comes to financial security, their incomes are not adequately protected through this avenue. Here are a few stats to illustrate those issues. First of all, what's the risk of someone actually experiencing an illness or injury that could keep them out of work for an extended period of time? According to the Social Security Administration, it'll happen to about 1 in 4 of today's 20-year-olds. That's 25%. But in our studies, we found that most people think their odds are much lower, less than 5%. Right now, almost 9 million American workers are receiving Social Security disability payments. And that's Social Security, which is generally intended for serious disabilities lasting a year or more. Unfortunately, we know that most Americans would start to struggle financially much sooner than a year. In fact, the Federal Reserve did a study last year and found that almost half of Americans are not prepared for a $400 emergency. If they lost their income for even a short time, they'd quickly run out of money. So we know that people really rely on their income, but this chart shows us that they're not being adequately protected in the workplace. Disability insurance is much less widely available in the workplace than other important sources of financial security, like health insurance and retirement benefits. The irony of that is, as we all know, that a disability would jeopardize those other forms of security: lost health coverage, no more contributions to retirement, and so on. You can see on the screen here that around 2/3 of private sector employees have no employer-sponsored long-term disability insurance, and only 2 in 5 have short-term disability. Unfortunately, our data suggests that very few of those who are not covered will seek or obtain individual coverage. Which brings me to the next point, which is that most people either ignore or underestimate their risk. In 2014, we did a study of consumer awareness where we tried to get at the disconnect in consumer attitudes about income and insurance. The data is confusing. 58% of our survey participants agreed that there's a risk of losing their income due to illness or injury, but only 28% said it's crucial to protect their income with insurance. But the disconnect tells its own story, that working people don't have a good handle on what disability insurance is and where they might need it. Like most statistics, though, I think there's a deeper story here. Very few of the survey participants felt strongly about their answer. Only 1 in 4 said they're fully aware of ways to protect their income. I think the takeaway is that people simply need to learn more about the issue, and that's where we all have a responsibility and an opportunity. So how do we do that? Well, that's where the CDA comes in. The CDA was formed in 2005 by a group of leading disability insurers. Their idea was to create an organization that focused on closing the consumer awareness gap we just discussed. Being objective and having no ties to a particular product enables us to focus on helping regular people and simplifying the issue in a way that individual insurance companies cannot. We're now supported by 18 of America's leading disability insurers, and we focus on educating working Americans and their trusted advisors about the importance of income protection through disability insurance and through related products. We don't sell products ourselves, and we also acknowledge that there are several different solutions, each with their own pros, cons, benefits, and limitations. We simply provide communications and research to help consumers and professionals understand the issue and make decisions. So last year we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And things have really changed in those 10 years. When the CDA was formed, there was no such thing as an iPhone or an iPad. Facebook existed, but most working-age people were not yet on it. It's incredible how much communications has changed in the last decade. For example, you can now film a video and share it on YouTube in a matter of seconds. You can use your smartphone to hold your boarding pass or pay for your morning coffee. As technology advances, our expectations change with it. Studies have actually shown that humans now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. And that's quite a challenge for those of us trying to communicate with busy consumers. Meanwhile, many people are still recovering from the effects of the post-2008 recession, and the Affordable Care Act has completely upended the benefits landscape. The increasing trend towards voluntary has only increased the need for education, yet with healthcare still dominating the enrollment conversation, employer and employee mind space for ancillary benefits is limited at best. So in the last couple of years, we at the CDA have made a deliberate attempt to change the way we tell the story. We'd previously focused most of our efforts on showing that the risk of disability is significant. And we'd also focused heavily on longer-term disabilities. We left it to others in the industry, carriers, agents, and brokers, to connect that risk to the protection that their products provide. But more and more we realized that this meant our message was confusing and not very relatable, which tends to cause consumers to move along with that short attention span that I was just talking about. At any point in our lives, we have a diverse range of things we're focused on and worried about. In today's media environment, consumers are bombarded with noise and understandably skeptical. Trying to imagine potential future health concerns and sifting through insurance options are two especially overwhelming topics. The industry, but especially the CDA, must strive for clarity, simplicity, and the right context. And that means a lot of things. It means helping people understand how to think about disability insurance. To some degree, we all think about our finances all the time. Are we making ends meet? Are we earning enough? Is it time for a raise or a promotion or to look for a new job? Is our health insurance premium going up? Can we afford a vacation this year? Can we afford to have children or grow our family? Perhaps we need a new car or a bigger house. Oh, and we're getting closer to retirement, and we really need to sock away some more money for that. Putting disability insurance in context means connecting the dots to the fact that it's our income that makes all of these things possible. Without it, our current and imagined lifestyle would be out of reach. Ultimately, just like any other product, consumers need to understand what disability insurance can do for them and whether it makes financial sense. Accepting their own risk is perhaps the most difficult barrier to overcome. We in the disability insurance world have the same problem that health insurers have. How do we convince a young, healthy person they need this protection? As people get older, their risk of disability increases. Our data shows that disability claimants are most likely to be over 50. It's not all that surprising. The older we are, the more likely we are to experience physical issues. But I think that's why some of our messaging, especially about longer-term disabilities, doesn't always resonate with younger people. Someone recently said to me that to a 25-year-old, 40 is old. In other words, I need to start thinking of myself as old. But no, seriously, in other words, if you tell a 25-year-old you might get disabled in your 50s, they will most likely hear, I don't need to worry about that for a long time. Even when they understand that people have this risk, they do not think it will ever happen to them. We did a study several years back now that actually quantifies this. We asked people to estimate the odds of disability for themselves and also for the average American. Most of the participants gave themselves a lower risk than they gave the average person. So given all of this, we need to find a way to explain the issue that speaks to the individual and their unique situation. MetLife has a great resource called the Words That Work Playbook. It goes into some of the ways that we can tailor our message. The general principle is promoting peace of mind from having coverage versus the fear of the consequences of not having it. So for those young invincibles especially, we can emphasize how disability insurance gives them security to focus on their long-term objectives. And as their trusted advisor, you're in the best position to understand what those objectives might be. And we can also make sure we don't overwhelm the consumer. And this is another place where you can make an enormous difference. With so much jargon and many complicated options, it's very easy for consumers to become overwhelmed. One of the great things about our sophisticated insurance marketplace is the many options and features that enable us to customize coverage. But if they're just getting to grips with the risk and haven't fully bought into the idea yet, we really don't want to overwhelm them with options. And that's why we at the CDA strive to explain disability insurance in relatable terms. Have you ever heard anyone say, I can't play golf this weekend, I have a musculoskeletal disorder? No, of course not. They'd simply say, my back is out, or my shoulder is stiff. Unless we're a medical professional, we really don't say cardiovascular disorder or neoplasm. We say heart disease or cancer. We see the same issue in explaining the terms of coverage. Is it easier to grasp the term elimination period, or how long you have to wait until you start receiving benefits? So those are some of the ways that we think it's important to simplify the message. And we've actually published a guide that's intended to simplify the topic and explain some of the jargon. You'll be able to find that on our campaign toolkit, which I'll go into later. So the last hurdle is, does it make financial sense? Or more simply, can I afford it? I bring this up because in our 2014 study that I mentioned earlier, about half of the people who don't have DI said it's because it's either too expensive or not good value. This weird-looking graphic that you can see on the screen right now is also from that study. We asked our survey participants how much they think disability insurance costs per month. The answers were all over the map, from $0 to $1,000 per month. About half were pretty close, keeping in mind that we didn't provide any context about the type of product. But most of the answers were quite a bit higher than you'd expect for group or voluntary coverage, and many were high even for individual. So if consumers are overestimating the cost and using cost as a reason not to purchase the coverage, that presents both a challenge and an opportunity for us to educate. So just to recap quickly, making the case is going to be slightly different for each individual. We need to understand what's important to them and what things they're focused on at this point in their life, and the most likely disability scenario. In light of that, one thing we're now focused on is delineating the different things that can cause a disability claim. As I mentioned earlier, the CDA has for much of our existence focused heavily on long-term disability claims. Our PDQ calculator, which some of you may be familiar with, even for a healthy person, highlights that an average long-term disability claim may well last over 5 years. But this is another example of where the most catastrophic scenario is the least relatable. It's really hard to imagine what life would be like if we were disabled for 5 years. It's much easier to imagine a pregnancy, or at least for women, a broken bone, a sprained ankle, and other everyday problems. So that's why we're now talking about 3 different scenarios. We're talking about happy times and inconvenient times. Disability insurance can help if you're having a baby or for something temporary and inconvenient. But it can also be there for you if you do have one of those more frightening scenarios like a heart attack, a stroke, or a cancer diagnosis. All of that leads me to this year's Disability Insurance Awareness Month campaign. This year's theme, and the title of this webinar, is Income Protection Through Every Stage of Life. We wanted to be able to talk about income protection in the context of where people are in their lives. And as we just talked about, 20-something recent college grads don't have the same things on their mind as someone at the end of their career, and vice versa. There's no one-size-fits-all message when it comes to income protection. So we divided up the month into 4 weekly themes, each one focusing on one of the 4 life stages you can see on the screen. Before I go into more detail, I should note that this specifically refers to what we'll be talking about on our blog, our social media, and our other activities. We'd love it if others followed suit, but it's certainly not a requirement, and we leave it to you to decide how you want to take advantage of the campaign and when. This is simply a way for the CDA to organize our different messages in a way that's easy to understand. So when we kick off the campaign next week, we'll be focusing on millennials, today's young adults. There's been a lot of commentary on this generation, not all of it accurate, but they're now the largest generation in the workforce, so it's important that we understand them. The possibility that they could experience a disability isn't exactly top of mind. Making the case to a young, healthy person is not easy, especially if they have no dependents and are focused on just living life. We have to acknowledge the reality that the risk of catastrophic disability when we're young is quite a bit lower than that 1 in 4 that we mentioned earlier. Injuries, while overall they cause less than 10% of long-term disability claims, are a much more likely cause for younger people. But beyond that, there are plenty of reasons why income protection is important. And one of those reasons is that their financial state is quite fragile. If they went to college, they probably have substantial debt. If they didn't, they're facing a rising income gap versus those who did. They're trying to establish themselves and progress through life at a time when it's harder than ever to be financially secure. Many are still feeling the effects of the post-2008 recession, and this seems to be causing them to delay major life events like marriage, buying a home, and starting a family. In a study by the Hartford, those life events were cited by many as triggers for buying life and disability insurance. So during our Millennials Week next week, we'll emphasize the need for a solid financial foundation, the importance of understanding your employee benefits and what might be missing, and encourage young adults not to ignore the future. There is some good news here about the millennial mindset when it comes to financial issues. Earlier I talked about consumers not thinking it's crucial to protect their income, but we actually found that millennials are more likely to agree with that than other generations. There's evidence that millennials are more attuned to financial security, that they expect to have to pay attention to their benefits, and that they want advice. To support the Millennial Weekly theme, this coming Monday we'll be releasing the first of our 2 ebooks. It's called Your Financial Guide to Life, and it's specifically geared towards millennials. It's another example of our desire to put income protection into a wider context of financial wellness and security. It goes into topics like paying down debt, creating a budget, building emergency savings, and of course, income protection. We've written it in a relatable way and avoided using insurance speak as much as possible. We'll be posting a link to the ebook on the campaign toolkit, but it will also be easy to find on both our blog and our homepage. In the second week of May, we'll turn our focus to young families. Having a family in America is more expensive than ever. First of all, new and growing families have most of the same problems that millennials do, since many of them are millennials. On top of all that, they're also worried about the cost of childcare, rising healthcare costs, and how to balance work and family responsibilities. It's likely to be the most difficult time in their lives to make ends meet, hardly a good time to find extra money to pay for another insurance policy. But the severity of the consequences of income might also be at their highest, so it's really important for them to be protected. And back to that point about context, young families, by necessity, tend to have a shorter-term focus. According to Unum, pregnancy is the #1 reason for short-term disability claims, and that's a good thing. It provides a source of paid leave, which most Americans don't have from their employer. That's a quick example of shifting our focus away from catastrophic and towards a more positive, less frightening scenario. But overall, when making the case, it's important that you understand everything young families are dealing with. As their trusted advisor, you can take away some of the uncertainty by focusing on the peace of mind that disability insurance can bring, rather than the severe consequences of not having it. So we're also releasing an ebook to help young families make sense of their financial picture. This second ebook is called Baby We Need to Talk, and will be published on May 9th. We'll cover the important financial conversations a young or expectant family needs to have: budgeting, work arrangements, childcare, even college savings, and of course, disability insurance. As I keep saying, providing a wider context that underscores the importance of income protection. On to week 3. This is called Empty Nesters, but we might have named it Empty and Full Nesters. In theory, we're talking mostly about Americans in their 40s and 50s. Their kids are grown up and have moved out, and it's a time to prioritize themselves, whether it's career reinvention, or enjoying more free time. Hopefully, they're also on a good track towards retirement. But if we take a closer look, many of these folks are finding themselves with a growing problem, caring for aging parents while also still supporting their adult kids. For many, their fully grown kids are often either still at home or at least still in need of financial support, as many as 1/3 according to some studies. That's already a pretty big burden, but then throw in the effects of the post-2008 recession, and they're staring at a financial crunch as they approach their own retirement. And not to be too negative, but if you cast your mind back to what I said earlier, this group is also the most likely to experience an income-interrupting disability. All of that makes income protection more important than ever for this group. So when we cover it this May, we're going to focus on encouraging people to protect what they've built and to safeguard their retirement. Also in week 3, we're going to be releasing a video entitled Why Income Protection Matters. On the screen here, you can see a clip from the video of my boss, the president of the CDA, Carol Harnett. You may know that the CDA Board of Directors is comprised of senior leaders from America's leading disability insurers. We recently filmed them giving their perspective on the importance of income protection and also conducted interviews with consumers about the importance of their income. This video is the end result, and it's going to be released Monday, May 16th. We'll wrap up the month of May with a week focused on those preparing for retirement. As with some of the other weeks, there is a bit of overlap with the previous week. A significant portion of Americans over 55 are not prepared for retirement. Last year, the federal government analyzed multiple studies on this topic and found a couple of startling facts. Almost a third have no retirement savings. The average 55 to 64-year-old has enough to provide only $300 per month when they retire. And Social Security is providing more than half of the income for more than half of retirement-age households. Just as other generations were, this group was hit hard by the post-2008 recession, losing their job, losing large chunks of their savings, and so on. Many will likely need to work past their expected retirement age so they can recover from these effects. They'll also have to contend with the increased likelihood of health problems and possibly thinking about long-term care planning. This changes their income protection outlook. If an individual is set for retirement, there comes a point where protecting their income doesn't need to be such a high priority. But for this estimated third to a half of the over 55 population, that's not the case. And income protection is actually vital as they use the last years in the workforce to catch up on their retirement planning. That was a lightning-fast overview of each of our weekly themes, but I wanted to give you a general flavor of what we'll be covering. Hopefully this reinforces what I've been repeating throughout today's presentation, that we want to understand and recognize the real-life context consumers are facing. Each group has different reasons why disability insurance is an important piece of the puzzle. If we can get our arms around that, we stand a better chance of helping them to protect their income. What can you do to help? First things first. In the consumer awareness study I've been referring to, we found that almost half of the people with no disability insurance said it was for one of the following reasons. They've never been offered it, they've never thought about it, or they don't know enough about it. We need you to help us correct that. So I ask you to make a pledge to discuss income protection with every client and prospect. Next week, we kick off Disability Insurance Awareness Month. It's a great opportunity to start that conversation. That's why we created the campaign toolkit. It's publicly available at disabilitycanhappen.org/DM. Download and share the materials as a way to introduce income protection. If you haven't already, I also recommend subscribing to our blog. We post on it several times a week, and our articles are all designed to help consumers by simplifying, explaining, and putting things in context. If you use Facebook and Twitter, we're also more active there than ever. So please connect with us and share our posts. And most importantly, I really recommend subscribing to our email list. Our subscribers get first look at our updates and new resources. There's a subscribe link at the bottom of our homepage, disabilitycanhappen.org, and also on the campaign toolkit. But you can also just send me an email and I'll be happy to add you. And here's just a quick summary of what you'll find on the toolkit. As well as general data, facts, and graphics about income protection, there's also going to be content to support each of our weekly themes that you can use in your social media, on your website, in your emails, or other communications. There's also some material that you can simply download and print. There's also the Consumer Guide to DI that I mentioned earlier, and links to lots of other useful CDA content. Hopefully this is not overly confusing here, but the plan is to update the toolkit at the beginning of every week. This slide shows you the timeline. The content to support each weekly theme will be available at least a week in advance. So for example, the Young Families Week begins on May 9th. You can access the fact sheet and the associated content from May 2nd. That's to give people time to prepare if they want to follow along with the weekly themes. Here's that link to the DM Toolkit once again. I'm going to leave it up for a few moments, but if you don't get a chance to save it, feel free to contact me afterwards. The resources on it are specifically designed for you to use when introducing income protection to your clients and prospects. Everything is freely available to use. It'll be available not just for May, but it'll stay there year-round, and you can download it anytime and use it as much as you would like. Just one last thing. Without the generous support of our member companies, what we do would simply not be possible. If you work with any of these carriers, please take a moment to thank them for stepping up and working together on behalf of the whole industry. We could not do this without them. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar today. I hope you found it useful and that it inspired some ideas for how you might use Disability Insurance Awareness Month to start a conversation with your clients. I wish you the best of luck, and I really thank you for all that you do to help us raise awareness about disability insurance. We're going to have some time now for questions, but if you prefer to follow up with me later, you're welcome to call or email anytime using the information that's on the screen. And there's that link once again to the DM Campaign Toolkit. I'll turn things back over to Tracy now. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. Again, if you have a question, go to the question pane on your control panel and type it in, and we can address it. At the moment, there aren't any questions. Again, there's Sean's email address there if you have questions that you think of later. And again, my email address is Tracy, T-R-A-C-E-Y, @plusgroup.us.com. Again, if you have any questions, type them in. If not, it looks like Sean did a great job giving us some wonderful information for Disability Insurance Awareness Month. And again, I wanted to mention our National DI Day event, which will take place on May 5th at various locations throughout the country. And for more information, you can contact me or go to the Plus Group website at www.plusgroup.us.com or contact your local Plus Group office. Again, I don't see any questions. Sean, thank you to you and the Council for Disability Awareness for kicking off our May Disability Insurance Awareness Month, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. And again, feel free to reach out to Sean or myself if you have any additional questions. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.